Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're journeying back in time to uncover the story of a place that is, in many ways, the very cradle of America, Virginia. This isn't just a story of a colony, it's the story of a nation's complicated birth, forged in hope, hardship, and profound contradiction. Let's begin. Before a single European ship touched its shores, this land was a thriving world. We now call it Virginia, but for thousands of years it was a tapestry of dense forests, winding rivers, and vibrant native civilizations. At the heart of this world was the mighty Powhatan Confederacy, a sophisticated political alliance of Algonquian-speaking peoples. Their lives were woven into the rhythm of the seasons, a deep spiritual connection to the land that provided everything. They were masters of agriculture, skilled hunters, and part of a vast trade network. But their world was on the brink of an irreversible change. The first sails appearing on the horizon were not just ships, they were the harbingers of a new era. Across the Atlantic, early 1600s England was a nation buzzing with ambition and plagued by poverty. The dream of empire was in the air, and the newly chartered Virginia Company of London sold a glittering myth. A new world filled with instant riches, gold for the taking. For the desperate and the daring, this was a gamble worth taking. They boarded cramped, fragile ships for a perilous Atlantic crossing, leaving behind everything they had ever known. They weren't just sailors or adventurers. They were people propelled by a powerful mix of desperation and hope, a volatile combination that would define the difficult years ahead. In 1607, 3 small ships navigated up a river they named the James and founded Jamestown. This was not the paradise they were promised. The settlement was immediately besieged by disease, starvation, and crippling internal conflict. The brackish water poisoned them, and the unfamiliar land refused to easily yield its bounty. Leadership was a revolving door of failure until the pragmatic, iron-willed Captain John Smith took control, famously declaring, "He that will not work shall not eat." But even his leadership couldn't prevent the horrifying, starving time of 1609-1610, when the colony teetered on the very edge of extinction. Against all odds, a supply ship arrived just as the last survivors were abandoning the fort. Jamestown had survived, but its stability was fragile as glass. Central to this survival story is the complex relationship with the Powhatan, and at the center of that relationship is a name we all know, Pocahontas. But the Disney version is pure myth. The real story is far more fascinating and tragic. Pocahontas was a young, intelligent daughter of the paramount chief, caught between 2 worlds. There was no romance with John Smith. Instead, she was later kidnapped by the English, held as a political pawn, converted to Christianity, and married to a planter named John Rolfe. Her journey to England, where she was paraded as a symbol of a tamed savage, was a propaganda victory for the Virginia Company. Her life story is a powerful lens through which we can see the deep cultural misunderstandings and uneasy diplomacy that defined these early, tense years. The man Pocahontas married, John Rolfe, would change Virginia's destiny not through politics, but with a plant. He experimented with a sweeter, more palatable strain of tobacco from the Caribbean, and the results were explosive. Suddenly, Virginia had found its gold. Tobacco became the cash crop that transformed the colony from a failing outpost into a booming enterprise. Ships that once brought desperate settlers now carried barrels of brown gold back to Europe. But this success came at a cost. Tobacco farming was brutal on the soil and required an immense amount of labor, setting the stage for a system that would forever alter the course of American history. The focus had shifted from mere survival to profit, and that changed everything. The year 1619 stands as one of the most pivotal in American history, for it was a year of 2 profound and opposing arrivals in Virginia. In that year, the first representative assembly in the New World, the House of Burgesses, was established, planting the seeds of democracy and self-government. But in that very same year, a ship arrived carrying 20 and odd captive Africans who were sold into bondage. In a single colony, in a single year, the twin legacies of America were born: freedom and slavery. This paradox, this deep-seated contradiction of liberty for some built on the bondage of others, would define not just Virginia, but the struggle for the soul of the entire nation for centuries to come. As the colony expanded, so did conflict. The insatiable hunger for tobacco land pushed settlers deeper into native territories, leading to decades of brutal warfare. But tensions were also brewing within colonial society. A deep chasm grew between the wealthy planters, the struggling indentured servants who had traded years of their life for passage, and the growing population of enslaved Africans. This powder keg exploded in 1676 with Bacon's Rebellion. What began as a dispute over frontier defense spiraled into a civil war, as Nathaniel Bacon led a populist army of white and black servants and farmers against the governor, his elite establishment. After the rebellion was crushed, the terrified planter class learned a crucial lesson. They needed to divide the poor to maintain control. They began to pass laws that created a legal distinction based on race, giving poor whites new privileges while hardening the institution of slavery for Africans. It was a cynical, powerful tool to secure their power. Out of these ashes rose Virginia's ruling class, the planter aristocracy. These first families of Virginia, the Lees, the Carters, the Randolphs, built a world of immense wealth and political power. Life on their grand plantations was one of imported luxury, refined manners, and intellectual pursuits, all built upon the brutal labor of hundreds of enslaved people. While men dominated public life, women ran the complex households, managing domestic production and family health in a world where survival was never guaranteed. This was a society built on a rigid hierarchy, a social order where one's place was determined at birth, and the institution of slavery was becoming more and more entrenched with every passing generation. Religion and education were pillars of this new society. The Anglican Church was the official state church, its rhythms marking the milestones of daily life from birth to death. And for the sons of the gentry, a new path to intellectual leadership opened with the founding of the College of William and Mary in 1693. Here, a generation of young Virginians absorbed the latest ideas of the Enlightenment: logic, reason, and the rights of man. In the grand houses and budding towns, European traditions were blending with the realities of the New World, slowly forging a new identity. Ideas of liberty and self-governance were no longer just abstract philosophy. They were beginning to shape colonial thought. The 18th century brought both unprecedented prosperity and rising tension. As settlers pushed west over the Appalachian Mountains, they clashed not only with native nations but also with another European power, France. Virginia found itself on the front lines of what would become the world's first truly global conflict, the 7 Years' War, or as we call it, the French and Indian War. It was here that a young, ambitious Virginian militia officer named George Washington had his first taste of battle and leadership, learning hard lessons in the wilderness. Britain and its colonies ultimately won the war, but the victory came with a staggering debt. To pay for it, London looked to the colonies, imposing new taxes and asserting control. For Virginians who had bled for the empire, this felt like a betrayal. The relationship between loyal subjects and the crown was beginning to fray. That fraying became a tear. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. Each new tax from Parliament was met with fiercer resistance in Virginia. In the House of Burgesses, a fiery lawyer named Patrick Henry delivered a speech that bordered on treason, challenging the king's authority and concluding with the legendary words, "If this be treason, make the most of it." Virginians organized boycotts of British goods, wrote revolutionary pamphlets, and formed committees of correspondence. In the taverns of Williamsburg and the halls of Richmond, a profound shift was occurring. They were ceasing to think of themselves as transplanted Englishmen, and starting to think of themselves as something new, something different: Americans. When the Revolution finally came, Virginia provided not just soldiers, but the intellectual and moral leadership that guided the cause. There was Thomas Jefferson, the philosopher from Monticello, who penned the immortal words of the Declaration of Independence. There was Patrick Henry, the voice of the Revolution, whose cry of "Give me liberty or give me death" inspired a generation. There was James Madison, the brilliant political architect who would later be called the father of the Constitution. And above all, there was George Washington, the reluctant revolutionary, the planter who traded his plow for a sword to become the indispensable leader of the Continental Army. Virginia's patriots didn't just fight the war, they defined what it was being fought for. Virginia was also a critical theater of the war itself. The British Navy raided its coast, burning the city of Norfolk. The capital was moved from Williamsburg to Richmond for safety, but the war would end where it all began, on Virginia soil. In 1781, a combined American and French army, led by Washington and Rochambeau, trapped the main British army under Lord Cornwallis at a small tobacco port called Yorktown. The siege was decisive. The British surrender at Yorktown effectively ended the war and secured American independence. On the very ground where a desperate colony had been planted, a new nation was born, and so we're left with the enduring legacy of Virginia. It is the birthplace of American ideals, giving the nation its founding creed of liberty and a generation of presidents. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are deeply influenced by the minds of Virginians. But it is also the birthplace of American bondage, a system of human slavery that contradicts every one of those ideals. How could the cradle of freedom also be the cradle of oppression? This is the central question of the American story. The echoes of Jamestown, of Bacon's rebellion, of Jefferson's quill pen and an enslaved man's labor, they are still with us, heard in every debate we have about who we are and what America truly means. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through colonial Virginia. If you found this story as fascinating as we do, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. We'll see you next time.